Wallhaus and raised 3 children. They raised their family in Champaign, Illinois, Boulder, Colorado, and Springfield, Illinois. Penny returned to college and earned her master's degree in mathematical systems and began her career in higher education administration, working at the Illinois Community College Board as a research associate and director of budgets, and ending her career at Northwestern University as director of analytical studies and director of student information systems. Penny currently serves on the board of the Bargain Box as treasurer and is chairman of the finance committee, the TidePointe Board of Directors. Please join me in welcoming Penny Wallhaus.
Thank you, Lee. Well, that's it. See you in the bar. When I woke up this morning, I thought, I'll be really glad when today is over. And you know what? It almost is. So I guess when you start your life stories, you start at the beginning. Oh, I went the wrong way. Of course I went the wrong way. What would you expect? This way is forward.
Let me see here.
That was, isn't this way forward, the down button?
Yeah, but I don't know what happened here.
Technical difficulties.
Always something. Hold on 1 second here. Okay.
Chicago, 1939-1940. That's where I was born. I was born Penelope Ann Petrus on 9/9/1939. I guess when you get to be my age, you don't mind telling your age. I guess 9 should be my lucky number, but I've never tested it. My mom and dad, I'm thankful to them for bringing me into the world. They were first generation of immigrants from Eastern Europe. My father's family immigrated from Poland. My mother's family immigrated from Lithuania. I never knew my grandfathers. They both died before I was born. But my grandmothers both came through Ellis Island as teenage women, teenage girls, and married here in the United States, and I'm a product of that kind of upbringing. And my Polish grandmother never spoke very good English, and my Lithuanian grandmother spoke English pretty well. So between Polish and Lithuanian and English, we had a good relationship. I grew up in a happy family. I had a sister 4.5 years younger than me. That's her, my mom. I had lots of aunts and uncles. They adored me, of course, and I adored them. And it was a nice childhood. I liked it. Everything was good. After I graduated from high school, Maria High School in Chicago, I went to the University of Illinois. And I remember one thing when I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign, Illinois. I was surprised that there were so many people from Illinois, and they didn't live in Chicago. But I met Bob Wallhaus right there. There. And he wasn't from Chicago. He was from Southern Illinois, a little town called Waterloo, Illinois, near East St. Louis, kind of down in that general area. So I married a boy from Illinois, but he wasn't from Chicago. And after our marriage, we got married in January of 1961, cold, windy day in Chicago. And my life started to change pretty quickly after this, because in 1963, Ted came along. In 1964, Tom came along. In 1965, Gretchen came along. So I was pretty busy. And I guess you could say My first job was CEO and executive director of the Wallhaus Nursery and Daycare Center. In fact, this is, you go back and you look at some of these old pictures and you reminisce and you go, oh my gosh, 708 Green Drive. That was our first house we ever bought and had in Champaign. This was our son Ted's first day of kindergarten. About 3 years after this, Bob took a job in, that's it, I did have to put this up. Life was good. We were learning to get along with each other during this period of time. In about 1970, Bob took a job in Colorado. So we headed to Colorado, and we went to Boulder, Colorado. Boulder was a neat little town at that time. It was a college town. The University of Colorado's in Boulder, nestled in Boulder Valley, up against the Flatirons here. The Flatirons are still here, and this is still all greenland in Boulder. But if you go back to Boulder now, it's smoggy. It has traffic problems that don't stop. It's still a nice place to go, but it was really nice in the 70s. We really enjoyed it very much. We went to, we did the things that you do when you go to Colorado. We learned to ski. We did a lot of hiking and picnicking, and up in Rocky Mountain National Park. And the gateway to Rocky Mountain National Park was Estes Park, Colorado, which is a neat little town. And we'd go up there, maybe spend some time in Estes Park. I'm not a camper, never will be, never was. But we'd picnic and hike, and that was a lot of fun. And there were several ways to get to Estes Park from Boulder. One of them was the Peak to Peak Highway, which we often took because it was a beautiful, beautiful scenic drive through the mountains from Nederland and up past Allen's Park and into Estes Park. Along that route, we came upon Charlie Eagle Plume's trading post. We stopped there one day. There really was a Charlie Eagle Plume, and it was the store was like a museum. So he had a lot of artifacts as well as stuff that he was selling: jewelry, sand paintings, rugs, Kachina dolls, and we stopped there often. The kids loved it because Charlie passed out arrowheads to the boys and feathers to the girls, which he claimed were eagle feathers, but I think they were painted crow's feathers. Kids loved it. And I got interested in the arts and crafts of the Indians of the Southwest, the Hopi, the Navajo, and the Zuni Indians. This is actually a picture of a case that Charlie had in his shop at that time with old pawn jewelry, a lot of it old pawn jewelry. Well, I had a friend who also was from Illinois, and she got interested in Indian arts and crafts as well. And she stopped in a new Indian store in Boulder called the Buffalo Indian Room, and she met the owner, who was a dentist from Boulder, and he was looking for someone to work in the shop. And he asked her, and she said, by this time, she was working a few days a week up at the Charles Eagle Plume place in Allen's Park. And she said, I've got just the girl for you, my friend Penny. So I gave the guy a call, went in and talked to him, and I was fascinated by it. And I thought, yeah, this is a nice opportunity. I think I'll take up this job. And so I became a salesperson and a manager. Now, the dentist, his family, he was from Farmington, New Mexico, and his brother and father were traders in Farmington, New Mexico. So that's why the brother opened a shop in Boulder. And I would go down to Farmington and go on buying trips with the owner. And it was kind of fun, and I started to learn a lot about mostly jewelry, as you can tell. And I even developed some consumer awareness courses for the Boulder Valley Parks and Recreations, and taught about, first of all, turquoise comes from, it's not mined for itself, it comes out of copper mines. And it comes in all shades of blue and green, and it's mostly in Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico where the mines are found. And I got to the point where I could look at a stone and tell sort of what mine it came from. One of my favorites was Bisbee, which was, good, I didn't do that. Bisbee, which was this mine. And then some of the green from Royston. There's some green, you can see different shades of green and blue. And then Spiderweb was a turquoise that had spiders running through it. And it was a lot of fun. I was having fun, the kids were having fun, we loved Colorado, and Bob said, we're going back to Illinois. I got a job in Illinois. Okay, so we packed up, hung up the hat, packed up the boots, and off we went to Springfield, Illinois. Now, I had every intention of opening an Indian arts and crafts store in Springfield. I didn't want to leave Colorado. I went too crazy about going to Springfield. But I thought, well, and Bob agreed that would be a good idea because we had some contacts, I knew some people, and kind of knew the business. And we got to Springfield, Illinois, land of Lincoln, capital of Illinois, and it didn't take too long before we all realized that that wasn't going to be a good idea. It was not the place to open up an Indian jewelry store. So I decided, what am I going to do now? I was a teacher. I mean, I had a degree in education. I had my family, and that's where I taught. I had a few odd jobs here and there as a substitute teacher. And I didn't want to work with kids anymore. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do? I think I'll get a degree, a master's degree, but I need to get some analytical skills. I thought they might be marketable. So I enrolled in a program at the University of Illinois, Springfield, and it was the mathematical systems program. I had to go back and take a lot of courses that I hadn't taken as an undergrad, one of them being calculus. And that about killed me. I thought, I'm not sure I really want to do this. But I struggled through it and took some classes in economics and management science and linear programming, and finally got a degree, a master's degree. I had 2 job offerings when I finished that program. One was with the EPA, and the other was with the ICCB, which was the Illinois Community College Board. The one with the EPA was soft money, and the one with the Community College Board was a permanent position. So I decided that's what I wanted to do. Plus that I knew a little bit about higher education. Bob was in higher education administration. So I took a job with the ICCB. Now, the Illinois Community College Board is a coordinating board for all of the colleges in Illinois, of which there are 39 districts. They are responsible for developing the operating and the capital budgets, for recognizing colleges, which was, you made recognition visits, and when they met statutory requirements, they were eligible to get grants from the state. These are the districts, 39 districts in Illinois, with some really interesting names like, let's see here, oops, back, like Spoon River, Shawnee, Lakeland, and all of these districts, I lost my train of thought. 39 districts, and Chicago had 9 campuses. So there were 9 campuses in the Chicago district, which is up here. And you can imagine there's a wide variety of needs in these districts, from auto mechanics to welding to LPN, and well, okay. The colleges have 3 sources of funding: tuition and fees. The colleges had local boards that set the tuition and fees. They collected property taxes, and then they had state grants. And the state grants were credit hour grants, equalization grants, and disadvantaged student grants. Back in 1980, it's a long time ago, it was $125.2 million in grants that were given to the colleges. The credit hour grants were grants for credit hours that they produced, instructional credit hours that they produced. And they were awarded across several different categories and for different prices because the cost was different. To provide the baccalaureate education was the kids could go to a community college for the first 2 years and then transfer to a 4-year institution. They could live at home. It was cheaper for them to do that. So there was a lot of 2-year baccalaureate degrees granted. Then there were certificates and degrees in LPN, nursing, and in, as I said, welding, auto mechanics. General studies were adult education, English as a second language, GED, to graduate education. You could get your high school degree through the college if you didn't graduate high school. And the various costs were distributed according to how many hours you produced in all those different categories. The special projects, which is what I really liked to do most of all, and I had two great mentors when I worked at the Illinois Community College Board. One was Dr. Ivan Locke, who was my direct report when I first started. He was the director of research. And then Jim Howard, he was the executive director. And they both were great mentors, taught me a lot, helped me a lot. And I worked with Ivan Locke on the handbook for conducting economic impact. Now, economic impact studies are done all over. We just put the data together. It's complicated. The colleges did them. They do them here. I think they did it for the bridge. They did it for the Heritage Golf Tournament. And you read about them all the time. And then another one was the analysis of the factors which affect instructional unit costs. That was done, the legislature asked that they passed a resolution and wanted us to look at the factors that influence the cost in public schools, in the community colleges. They thought maybe if a district's wealth, in other words, the equalized assessed evaluations, were high, they could afford to spend more money on programs, and therefore they had more money to spend, and the state grants were not appropriate to give them more money. So we did an analysis, a regression analysis of all the factors. We looked at faculty load, we looked at program mix, we looked at the size, and to try and find out if there was a direct correlation with wealth and cost. We found out that almost all of the factors influenced the cost, and wealth was not one of the stronger ones. Then in late 1970, let's see, let me think of this, but probably, it was late 1984, I got a call from a person that I knew actually in Colorado socially, and I belonged to a professional organization called the Association for Institutional Research, and I reconnected with her from Boulder, and she was now working in the office of the president at the University of Colorado. And his name was Arnold Weber. And in late 1985, he was hired by Northwestern University in Evanston, and he brought Marilyn McCoy, my friend, with him to Chicago, to Northwestern University. And she called, and I had talked with her at the association meetings, and she wanted to bring an institutional researcher to Northwestern. And I said, well, yeah, I'd like to talk to you about that. And talked to Bob, and Bob said, sure. So I went up and interviewed for the director of analytical studies at Northwestern University. Now, Arnold Weber was a very interesting guy. He was an economist, a labor economist, worked in the Office of Management and Budget for Nixon, was faculty at the University of Chicago, MIT, and he was kind of growly, and I'd say mean, but I think probably tough would be a better word. It wasn't mean, but he was tough. I was scared to death of him. And but I had to interview him. And so I went up there and met all the other people and finally sat down with Arnold Weber, and wasn't sure how that was going to go. But apparently it went well, because Marilyn called me and said, you've got the job if you want it. So I said to Bob, what do you think? Should I go to Chicago? And he said, sure, go ahead and go. So I packed up my bags and I went to Chicago and got in a little apartment. And it was the first time I lived alone all my life. I mean, I lived with my family. I got married. I had a husband. I had 3 children. Now I took this job in Chicago, and I was living alone for the first time in my life. And it was scary, but I did it. We did it, and I was back in Chicago, and I never did like Springfield, Illinois. It wasn't just my community. And this is, of course, now the skyline, and this is kind of, Bridgeport, where I grew up, is about 6 miles from the Loop, and this is about 6 miles from the Loop. So that's the city now, and the city I showed you in the first slide was the way it looked back then. So anyway, I moved to Chicago and went to Northwestern University. The offices were in Evanston. They had an Evanston campus and a Chicago campus, but the main campus was in Evanston, and started life as the director of analytical studies. Now, Arnold Weber was, I don't know how else to say it, but he just loved data. He couldn't get enough data. And Marilyn, her job was to establish this Office of Institutional Research, which was the Analytical Studies Office. And she was also the secretary or the person that dealt with the board. And then her and Arnold instituted program review. And that was a process where they reviewed all of the academic and administrative units in the university, and they still have that at Northwestern, and they've done it now 4 or 5 times. But all of that stuff required information, and I put together information about tuition, about admissions, about faculty salaries, about yield data, and we established a management update meeting. And the management update meeting was with the president and his vice presidents once a month. And I brought them information, and Marilyn and I brought them information, and we talked about how the university stacked up, what we were doing. And those were good meetings. They were fun because there was an interchange, and a lot of the vice presidents didn't know a lot of stuff about the other universities. So it was really a learning lesson for everybody. And they would ask more questions, and that would generate more ideas, and then we'd have to go back and get more data to come forward. Interestingly enough, Arnold Weber was a man who thought that tuition should be low. He tried to keep it as low as he could, and his board of directors even said, "Arnold, you're leaving a lot of money on the table." Well, just out of curiosity, I look back. Tuition at the time Arnold Weber was president was about $12,000. Not cheap. I went and looked at what it is today. It's almost $61,000. That's a 400% increase. I mean, $49,000 more per year to send your kid to Northwestern now than it was back in the 80s, the mid 80s. And Arnold, by the way, even though he smoked like a chimney, he lived to be like 92 years old. And I'm sure he's turning over in his grave when he sees that kind of tuition levels. U.S. News and World Report. Back in, when was it? When did they start that? I can't remember. I'll look it up. U.S. News and World Report was a news magazine like Time and Newsweek. And they started in '83 or something like that to rank colleges and universities. And it became a very popular ranking. And you recently read about the law schools that say they're not going to participate any longer because they don't like the rankings and they don't like the way they're coming out. Well, that was the case back in the 80s as well. And part of the survey was to give the president a survey, and he told him who he thought was the best college in the country. Well, Arnold was smart enough, and he told him Northwestern was the best college in the country. But there was another part of the survey, which was the data that drove the rankings. And he said, "Penny, look at those surveys and tell us what we're doing and what we're saying about ourselves and make us look the best way you can." And so I got involved in some of that. Now, a lot of that data came from the Department of Education, so there was nothing you could do about that except if you had entered it wrong. But there were some things. Faculty salaries. I looked at our faculty salary surveys, and there was a faculty member at Northwestern who was a Holocaust denier, and he was tenured in the College of Engineering. Well, he was tenured. They didn't get rid of him, but he stayed around and drew a salary, and it was minimal. I mean, he never got a promotion, he never got a raise, but he was there and he was in the faculty. And I would take him out of the analysis because he wasn't a typical salary person. And that made our salaries look higher. And I don't know if any of that had anything to do with it, but back in the 80s, the early 80s, Northwestern ranked in the top 20, I think about 17. And by the mid-90s, they were in the top 10, ranking 9. And I think they still, I'm pretty sure I know they still do this survey because that's why it's in the papers recently. And I think Northwestern still ranks about 9. And so that was an interesting project. The other interesting project was the Entering Freshman Survey. And when I picked it up at Northwest, that started in 1963, I think. By the time I got to Northwestern, there were 25 years of data on entering freshmen, first-time entering freshmen. Now there's 50 years of that data. It's a huge database, and it's got a lot of good stuff in it. Let me see if I can find this. It asked all sorts of questions about demographics, about parents' income, about what you spent time doing. Did you exercise? Did you drink beer? Did you go to church? Did you drink liquor? All sorts of interesting things. And one interesting thing that happened from 1968 to 1990, there was a question about what are you in college for? What do you want to do? And there were lots of options. And two of them were developing a meaningful philosophy for life. And one of them was being well off financially. Well, from 68 to 90, in 68, 85% of the entering freshmen said that what they wanted to get out of college was to develop a meaningful philosophy of life. By 1990, only 45% of the students said that was their goal. And conversely, to be well off financially, in 1968, only 45% of the entering freshmen said that was one of their goals and objectives for college. And by 1990, that was 75%. So it just flipped, just really flipped. They're still doing the entering freshman survey. You used to read in the paper once in a while about what's happening with those norms and what students are doing, what they're not doing. I don't see it in the paper anymore, so I don't know if anybody's not interested in it. I don't really know. Anyway. Along about 1995, somewhere in there, PeopleSoft was developing a student information system. Northwestern became a beta school for that project. And finally, we purchased that system. And it was student records, admissions, grading, class registration, financial aid. And Northwestern purchased the system after being a beta school. There were 5 beta schools. I can't remember all of them. I remember University of Minnesota was one of them, and what the other 3 were, I don't remember. And the vice president for information systems asked me if I would like to come over and work with him and be director of student information systems. And I said, his name was Mort Rahimi. And I said, Mort, I'm not a techie. I mean, I know how to get some data out of these systems, and he said, that's not what I really want you for, Penny. He said, what we need to do is understand the procedures and how we're handling data getting into the systems and getting out of the systems and how we're processing it. And you have worked with these people to get information for all these reports. So I said, okay, I think and about this time, Arnold Weber retired. And so that sort of interest kind of faded. And I went over and worked with the techies. And I was to be the liaison between the functional units and the new system. And that meant that I had to document their procedures. And I had to ask them why they did things the way they did and why the paper went from here to there and from there to here. And it was tough because people didn't want me messing around with what they were doing. They'd been doing it forever and ever and ever. And the canned response when I would say, well, why do you do it that way? Or why does it not go from here to there? They'd say, because that's the way we always did it. And that's, that's the way things are. That's the way things are. And a lot of people retired because of the new system. They didn't want to learn to do things a new way. And I understood that, and they understood that. But it was tough, and I got a lot of arrows in my back, and a lot of grief from a lot of the people. And I thought, I don't think I need to do this anymore. So, but in the meantime, when I moved to Chicago, Bob, well, this is an interesting part of the story too. I got a small apartment in Chicago, and Bob said, well, you're going to come back to Springfield as much as I'm going to go up to Chicago, because he was going to come back and forth. And his work took him to Chicago once in a while. I said, oh, sure. Well, it didn't take long before we knew that we were going to make our home in Chicago. So I moved over to this Lake Point Tower, this 70-story apartment building. It was apartments at the time, but they were converting. And while we lived there, it converted to condos. And we bought a condo on the 27th floor, so it's somewhere about in there. And it was a very unique building. It had a park on the 3rd floor with a swimming pool. And the building was all windows. And we bought a condo there, and I lived alone, and Bob came up on weekends for about 8 years. And then Bob finally retired, and he moved in with me full time. So I had a roommate again. And kind of an interesting story about this is I was on the board at the condo association board, and we were a governing board. We were not an advisory board like we are here. And these windows, I mean, you can imagine your whole house was windows. The whole building was windows. And when it was built, they had a special machine built that went up and down, constantly washing windows. Well, the machine got to be 25, 30 years old. I can't remember when the building was built. And it was breaking down, and they couldn't get parts. And then we had people that actually hung down on scaffolding and washed those windows. It was interesting to watch them. But anyway, one morning, I got on the elevator with Bob. I was going to work. I had my briefcase and my high heels. Bob has golf bag and his golf T-shirt on. And I thought, there's something wrong with this picture. So I said, I gotta do something else. So in December of 1999, I retired, and Bob and I moved to Hilton Head in January of 2000. Now this is kind of the view out of our window. This is up Lakeshore Drive. That's where I drove to work every morning for 15 years. Beautiful drive, loved it. But sometimes this happened. Precipitation and snow. That's my life story. Thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, let's go have a drink.
Any questions for Penny? Okay, we got a question here.
When I went to Chicago, yeah, they were, oh, let's see, where were they? They were in college or out of college, I think, by the time I moved to Chicago. Yeah. Yes?
Why didn't you ever move to Evanston?
Because I knew that Bob didn't move to Chicago with me. He was going to come in on the train. He took the train from Springfield, and the train station was down in the Loop area, and so he could take a cab and be home very quickly. So it was more fun to live in the Loop anyway, to live downtown.
Did you ever check out Bob's bachelor quarters?
Yeah, I did once. When he retired, I went down. It was, I think, the only time I went back to Springfield when Bob retired. By the way, that is another. We had a big old house kind of out in the country, and we sold a house when I took the job, and Bob got a little apartment next to the train station in Springfield, and he had his job took him up to Chicago on Friday, and he would make sure that it was Fridays or Mondays and Tuesdays, so that he could come and spend a weekend and work for 2 or 3 days while he was there. So it worked out pretty well. I got to tell you one story. When I told the people at the ICCB that I was going to take this job in Chicago and I was going to move there by myself, they kind of, what's going on? Well, one of our dogs died right before I left, right before I resigned. And you know, dogs are your family. And I cried all night long, and I went to work the next day, and my eyes were swollen. And everybody said, okay, now Penny, tell us the truth. What's really going on? But I said nothing. Jay?
What was it like as a student taking Bob's course in graduate school?
You remember that, Jay. You've got a good memory. Well, I don't. Bob can talk to you about that. Bob was a good. I did take a course from Bob when I was getting my master's degree. Bob, everywhere we went, Bob was adjunct faculty at University of Illinois, University of Colorado, University of Michigan, all over. And he was at University of Illinois Springfield, and he did teach me a course. He didn't give me the exams, which was why I passed it. He was a good instructor, and I would critique him all the way home about his delivery, and I passed. Tom?
Penny, you had significant positions in a world that was pretty well dominated by men.
Yeah.
Did you feel any pressure being a woman in a significant position?
That's a good question. When I went to Northwestern, Marilyn McCoy was the first woman vice president they had ever had. And so that sort of set the standard. And I had good mentors. I was really lucky. I mean, there were a few men that were difficult to get along with, but as I said, at the ICCB, I had Dr. Locke and Dr. Howard, who really were good to me and kind to me and helped me a lot and encouraged me a lot. And at Northwestern, it was the same thing. Marilyn and I were the only two women, except for secretaries, in the suite of offices that were the president's suite of offices. And I'm sure that's changed now. I don't really know. Marilyn, by the way, I just got a notice. Marilyn is resigning after 35 years at Northwestern. She lasted there a long, long time. She'd been through, I think, she's on her 5th president. Do you remember something like that? And she was on the search committees for all the presidents. So she's a survivor. I learned a lot from her as well. Yes, David?
Penny, although it wasn't prevalent in your day, do you care to comment about the progressive culture that permeates secondary education today?
Secondary education?
In college education.
Can you restate that for me so I get a better feel for what you want me to say,
It
answer?
wasn't prevalent so much in your day, but today we have quite a bit of progressive culture
Yeah.
permeating secondary and college education
Yeah.
today. Do you care to comment on that? Are you familiar with it?
I can't. I mean, I can tell you about my experience, and I didn't have a big experience in that regard. And I can't tell you. You saw how through this entering freshman survey, how values of entering students have changed. And my guess is that database is huge, and it's got a lot of stuff, good stuff in it. My guess is if you went through that database and looked, you'd see a lot of these trends emerging with these kids. And remember, those freshmen were first time entering full-time freshmen, so it wasn't just any old kid in school. It was a real typical college kid.
How did you end up at TidePointe, and where are your children now?
Okay. We ended up at TidePointe because we thought it was the best place to retire to after living in, we built a house in Palmetto Hall, and we're there for 20 years. And we always thought we'd go to Cyprus. But our doctor said, go look at TidePointe. And we came and looked at TidePointe and fell in love with it, and here we are. And my kids now, our oldest, I have 2 back in Colorado. Our oldest and our youngest are both in Colorado, and they live 10 minutes apart. They live in Broomfield, Colorado, which is between Boulder and Denver. And at that time where they live, it was just all prairie and pasture. Nothing was there. And now it's Strip City from Boulder to Denver, and they live in the middle of it all. And then our middle child, Tom, who was born in '63, he's in Madison, Wisconsin. He's a cardiologist, and he has 2 daughters, and then our daughter, who lives in Colorado, she has 2 kids, a boy and a girl. So we have 4 grandchildren. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank Penny Wallhaus. We got a question in the back. We have a question in the back, late question.
Today is Joy's birthday. I think we should sing happy birthday.
Oh, Joyce.
All right, let's go. Happy birthday